Memories of the past, roots and tradition. Memories are cast in an Appalachian reunion. A taste of heritage, Screen Porch Suppers. Tales tall as a mountain ridge as we go deeper in the holler.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Appalachian Tale Podcast. I'm Jimmy Proffitt, your host, and today's podcast is not exactly what I thought it was going to be. I had one all recorded. I had a great guest, somebody that you would have loved. You would have loved them. And maybe I can still get them to come back. I think I can. I hope I can. Anyway, they're a great person, somebody that I think you would really like. And I just don't know what I'm doing yet. So that's the problem. I do not know what I'm doing yet. And I recorded the entire thing without my earbuds in. So that meant that my speakers were hearing everything, or were saying everything that they said, and then my microphone picked up what they said. So then it was this reverbing echo that just went on forever and ever. And there's no way I can use the audio. So had I known what I was doing, I would have done it properly. And I think they even asked me, do you want me to use my earpods? I'm like, no, it'll be fine. No, I've already recorded 3 of these. By golly, I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. I don't have a clue. I do not have a clue what I'm doing. But anyway, so it's me today. And you know, it really got me thinking, I may just end up doing this kind of thing like every other week. So if I can produce a podcast every week, it may be one week it's me and the next week it's a guest, and back and forth. So you need to let me know if that's something that you would be interested in, first of all. And we'll try and take it from there and see what we can do. I've made some notes on things that I want to talk about because I don't want to just run into this blindly, although obviously that's what I've been doing, and it's not necessarily worked out the best for me. So I just want to make sure that I've got some things that I want to talk to you about today. First was just that, this podcast isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. Not this episode. The podcast itself is exactly what I thought it would be. I'm having a good time with this so far. I know it's only been 3 episodes, one with myself to introduce what I was doing, and a couple of them with Mick, and I think that one was really good, and we need to do more with Mick because he's got a lot of stories, and I can just ask him one question, and he can talk on it for a while. So he doesn't necessarily like the camera, but I think he's pretty good with it. So the camera and the microphone, I think we can do that again. So we'll do more of those. But this one's just me, and then we'll get some more guests. I've got some people lined up to talk to record with, and I think you're really going to like them too. I'm just going to try and keep this just real conversational. So whatever we talk about is actually what we're talking about, not too scripted. I'll just have some notes of things that I want to touch on like I'm doing today and things I want to talk about. But other than that, it's just me and them talking, and you're getting it just as real as it can be. Today I was taking my aunt to an appointment, and we passed a store, and she mentioned something about it, and I said, oh yeah, the bread store. And she laughed, and I laughed, and I said, or the day old bread store. And she said, or the used bread store. And we just kind of chuckled about it because growing up, the bread store, the day old bread store is what we always called it growing up, was something that not everybody visited. I don't know if you did or not, or if you even know what it is that I'm talking about. But if you're Appalachian, you probably definitely know what I'm talking about. And the day old bread store is where you would go to get a loaf of bread for half or less of the cost of that loaf of bread in the grocery store, because it was day old bread. It was the bread that didn't sell in the grocery store, and they pick it back up when they brought a new fresh shipment of breads, and those breads would go off to the little outlet store, as it were. We're used to outlets now, but back then we didn't know what an outlet was. That was the the outlet was what you plugged everything into in the wall, not the store where you went and got things at a discount. But anyway, so it was the day old bread store, and I remember going to the day old bread store many, many, many times, even as an adult. There was one not far from where I lived. I could almost walk to it, and go in there and get a loaf of bread. For a while I made my own bread, and so I didn't have to, but when we were just buying loaves of bread, that's what we did. And then you'd get to the counter and they'd have something on special, some, little snack, a treat, something, and it might be hand pies for 10 cents, 25 cents, whatever. I remember the pecan pinwheels, which I kind of like, but not really. But maybe with a cup of coffee, they're pretty good. Those little twirls of pecan pinwheels, and they'd have them for 25 cents for a whole pack. And I think at the store they'd be $1. So, I saved a whole 75 cents, which actually was still a lot of money back then. But I almost wanted to stop at the day old bread store today and just look around and see what they had. But we didn't. We had finished our appointment and headed on back. But let me know if you visited, shopped at, went to the day old bread store. She said that my uncle, who just actually passed away not long ago, my Uncle Jim, partly named for, the name comes from both sides of the family. Although there's another story there, and maybe I should tell you. I don't know. I told you this conversation was just going to be real and just what it is. But I was named partly for my Uncle Jim, or James, on my dad's side, his brother, but also my granddaddy on my mom's side. His name was James Dewey Levi Barton, and he was something else. I'll tell you more about him one day. But when he passed away, and they had to get the death certificate and the birth certificate and all those things together to kind of finalize some things and make sure that my grandma was going to be okay and that the house was hers and all that kind of stuff, they found out his name was not James. His name was just Dewey Levi Barton. And my grandma didn't know. She was married to this man for more than 50 years and did not know that his first name was not James. It was just a name he made up, just a nickname or something he went by. And she called him Jim. I mean, that's what she referred to him as, Jim, all the time. And so I think it's kind of funny that when I got married, my father-in-law, his name was R.B. The letter R, the letter B. That was his name. And then his last name, Proffitt. And he never had an actual name. It was just letters, just initials. And when he went to get his driver's license, they said, but you can't have just initials. You've got to have your name on your driver's license. So he thought about it for a second. He said, okay, Reuben Bob. And he went by Reuben Bob from there on. Even my mother-in-law would call him Reuben all the time. His brothers and sisters, friends, people would call him Reuben. But most people just called him RB. And that's because that was his name. So I don't know why everybody in my family on both sides now went by names that weren't their names. But anyway, that's where I got my name. But my Uncle Jim, getting back to that, as I ramble on here, getting back to Uncle Jim, my aunt said he wasn't really a fan of the used bread store, as they called it, when they were growing up, because it just felt like the bread wasn't fresh. It was used, and he didn't want people knowing that they were going to the used bread store. It wasn't that he was too prideful or anything, because my family wasn't like that. Granddaddy was a preacher, so they were used to not having a lot of things, that things were provided for them if they needed them. But going to the day old bread store, the used bread store, wasn't really something that he was a fan of. But he didn't mind, my aunt said, going to a store and searching for everything that was on sale and getting a deal. But it was something about that bread that just didn't feel right to him. He didn't like the way that it made him feel. And I think it's because a lot of people put a connotation on there that if you go to the day old bread store, you're doing that because you're poor. And you know what? A lot of us were. A lot of us are. And that's okay. A lot of us still also like a deal. So there's that. But anyway, I just thought that was funny today when we drove by, and we just kind of had a chuckle about the bread store. Part of this podcast, I talk about being deeper in the holler. So I want to kind of give you stories, go behind the scenes, tell you about people that I've known my whole life growing up, people today, people that are gone now. And there are two people that were really, really influential in my life, and that was Mary and Charlie. They were neighbors of mine growing up, and they were like surrogate grandparents. And I talked about them this week on my Substack a little bit, because this time of year, I would have been out in the garden with Charlie, laying off the rows and getting things planted, He kept the line on a couple of sticks, and he'd give me one stick that didn't have much line to it. It was just tied off on there, and he kept the other stick with all the string just kind of wrapped around that. And I'd walk up across the garden, and he'd plant his stick when I got across there, and then he'd eyeball it, and he'd tell me go left or right, and he'd line it up, and then I'd hammer that into the ground with a mallet, and we'd lay off the row, and then we'd get the hose out, and we'd start hoeing from one end and the other, and we'd meet in the middle, and we'd have the row laid off, and then we'd move on to the next, and then either plant it as we did it, or come back and plant whatever we were putting in, if it was potatoes or beans or whatever, and then cover it back up and get the rows done. So I'd be out there laying off some rows in the garden with Charlie, and then Mary would be inside, and she'd be cooking something always. So I talked in my Substack about her strawberry cobbler, so go over there if you want to get the recipe. It's simple, but it's good. And I'm not a real big fan of strawberry stuff. I've got strawberries growing this year, though, so if I get enough strawberries off there, I think I'm going to make a strawberry cobbler, unless Mick makes me make a strawberry pie. But anyway, sometimes we just like having them fresh. But I talked about that in my Substack. One thing that she definitely would have always when we were working on something, or especially when it got hot, was some iced tea, sweet iced tea. And she had a green nubby fat pitcher that had the nubby bumpy glasses to go with it, almost like it just felt all ribbed and nubby. I don't know how else to explain it, but I love that set, and I actually found a set in an antique store, and I bought it just because I just wanted it. I've not used it yet, but maybe one day I will. Maybe it'll show up in a photo somewhere. I put sweet iced tea, as she taught me to make it, in the cookbook, but I didn't have that picture at the time. I really wish I did, because that would have made it really feel like spending a little time with Mary, drinking some iced tea on the porch. And that was something else that we did a lot there. We sat on the porch in the evenings. That was our pastime. If we'd already watched Wheel of Fortune, the Waltons, something like that, we might go out and sit on the front porch until dark and just watch people go by. So I lived on a little country road, and there was a main highway not far away, so we could see cars going down the highway, but it was that little country road that we would sit on the porch there and just watch people go by. A lot of people walking, so if somebody was walking, they'd stop and they'd talk for a little bit. They might come up, have a glass of tea, and their front porch was long. It was all the way across the front of the house, and they had that old metal furniture, the glider and the rocker and the chair that all matched, and Mary made cushions for it every couple of years, so she would sew a lot of stuff by hand, and she would just get some foam rubber, as they called it, some foam rubber, and for stuffing the pillows and the cushions that she made for the furniture. And that would be out there for a couple of years till it kind of got worn out or faded, and she'd find some new fabric and she'd make some more. But we'd sit out there and just chat about anything and everything. Charlie was real good about giving advice, especially when it was just he and I up in the garden. So as he was teaching me what to do, of tilling and hoeing the rows and covering up the potatoes and laying off the rows and all that kind of stuff, he'd always have some other advice, like, girls are a dime a dozen, so don't mess with them right now, just leave them alone. Well, I kind of listened. I left him alone. Girls didn't interest me much, but I didn't tell him that. I don't know that he would have taken too kindly to that, but maybe he'd understood a little bit more because he knew me. But anyway, he would just have all kinds of advice, and he would say things that just would make me laugh. If he got tired, he'd stop at the end of the row and he'd sit there. He might get down on one knee if he was really tired and just kind of rest for a minute. He'd go, I'm all petered out. And he'd sit there and he'd take his handkerchief and wipe the sweat off his brow and just rest for a minute till he was no longer petered out. And I thought that was pretty funny. So, like I said, they were like surrogate grandparents to me, and I spent not just the summers over there when we were out of school. Definitely, I'd be over there almost every day doing something, helping him. I mowed the yard every year for him, and then help gather everything in the garden and we'd be putting it up. But this time of year, it was definitely getting everything prepped and started mowing the yard. And they also had peach trees in the yard, so we'd be dusting the peach tree with 7, and they had a cherry tree, and they had a strawberry patch, and almost like a little orchard. There was a pecan tree up in the back of the yard, but it had pretty much stopped producing. By that point, you'd see a few pecans on it, but not many, not enough to harvest, so they didn't bother with them anymore. And then there was a mimosa tree up there, and I always thought that was the coolest thing. If you know what a mimosa tree is, they get a really pretty bloom on them in the big fluffy bloom in the spring, going into summer. But the leaves on it, the branches would have these long, almost like fern, like leaves coming off of, or little tiny branches coming off with leaves, and they would close up at night. So it was like, it was probably something biblical to it that they looked like they were praying as the leaves would close up at night. And then of course they had their smokehouse, and behind the smokehouse they had the gutter run off into a couple of barrels. So everything we used to water the garden was just rainwater, and I think that's really what helped the garden so much. So I just put in another rain barrel here at the house. We had one up at Mick's mom's house, and we brought that home before we sold it so we could install it down here. I've got one that I've been using to water everything back here that I could, but we installed that other one so we could keep watering with rainwater as much as we can. And speak of the devil, as my mom would say, here comes Mick now. He's just pulling back in the driveway, so he'll probably interrupt us for a second, and that's okay. You probably won't mind hearing from him again, but I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit. But when we got done at the end of the day and we're sitting on the porch, along with those that old metal glider and stuff, Mary always had geraniums in planter boxes at the steps of the porch, and then up on top of the porch. And so I keep a geranium by my back door. Hers was by the front door, but I keep one every year. I plant it in the same spot by the back door, and it makes me think of her. And then she also had aloe vera plants everywhere. She had pots and pots and pots of them. So if one of us kids got a scrape or a cut or anything, she'd go snap off a piece of the aloe vera and tell us to rub it on there real good after we washed it, and that would help heal it up. And you can come say hi. He's looking at me like, what am I doing? So those of you that are watching this, we'll see him in just a second. But I'm just recording a podcast. What are you doing?
I bought you stuff.
Oh, you got me stuff. Okay. Well, I'll come look at that stuff later.
You bought me stuff.
So say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, good job. All right, now go on in the house. Behave yourself. Yeah, so she'd have all kinds of plants. She'd do some other plants, but she always had geraniums and aloe vera every year. And the geraniums the aloe vera she'd bring in. Of course, the geraniums would die off in the fall, winter, and but the aloe vera she'd bring in to keep it going, and then put it back out in the summer. So no matter when we got hurt, we'd have that. And on the back porch, Charlie, this time of year in particular, would have his dandelion wine in a couple of jugs sitting on the back porch. So he'd just keep a couple of old milk jugs, and he'd put all the dandelion blooms in there, and then he'd fill it up with some sugar water, and he'd put a little cheesecloth over the top and let it sit on the back porch. And that's why we didn't sit back there much. We'd work back there a little bit, but as that wine would sit back there and ferment for I don't know how long. It seemed like it was all summer, but it was probably just a few weeks to a month or something like that. The bees would swarm the tops of those jugs, so you just had to be careful because there were bees all over the place on the back porch always because of that. But then in the wintertime, he'd enjoy a little bit of that dandelion wine. He was known to make me a toddy or two when I'd come over and shovel the driveway out or something if it snowed, and or I'd have a cold, and it was probably more just water than dandelion wine, but to me it had enough of a kick to it, and I was sure it healed me, pretty sure it healed me, and it would take care of whatever ailed you. But he would keep it in the basement. It was supposed to be a secret. I wasn't supposed to know where it was, but I always knew it was right behind the doors you went into the basement. And that was another spot at their house that I absolutely loved, was their basement, because in the heat of the summer, that basement was easily 20 degrees cooler. And it was really the cellar. So it was one of those that had the metal doors that opened up, and they were kind of leaning. It looked like they were leaning against the house. You'd open those up and step down the concrete block stairs down into it, and you could feel it starting to cool off as you got down there. And then you'd open up that basement door, and it was a wooden door. There's hand-built wooden door, and it would creak just like you would imagine it would. And you'd open that door and feel that cool air just kind of hit you. And there was probably just one, maybe two light bulbs hanging out of the ceiling down there. But that's where all the canned goods were. So we'd go down and start gathering cans to bring up and wash when it was time to start picking things. But before that, I'd go down for Mary and, grab whatever she needed, a couple of cans of beans or something like that, and take old jars down there that had already been used, and she was going to store them down there for the rest of the summer until it was time to start harvesting and canning things again. She canned lots of beans, lots of tomatoes, lots of that stuff, but we'll talk about that more in another episode on down the road. But part of the basement had a concrete floor, and the rest of it was just a dirt floor. So when you walked down there, it just had that real earthy smell, and it felt slightly damp, cool, and just the smell. I just loved the smell of it. It was really earthy, and if I think about it, I can still smell that today. And I've written about that a few times. It's one of my favorite memories. And that's just going a little deeper in the holler on Mary and Charlie, and I'll talk about them some more in future episodes of this, because I just have so many memories about them and what they meant to me and the things they taught me. They taught me to be who I am. And right now, just around here, we've just got a lot going with our garden. All the raised beds are full. Potatoes are coming up. I've got 3 different squash coming up right now. Cucumbers are coming up. I've got 2 different varieties of cucumbers, 3 varieties of potatoes, 2 varieties of beans. I've got some tomatoes in the ground, and I've got tomatoes and okra here in the greenhouse. In the greenhouse studio, that's what it is used for, but as well as the studio. And so those are coming along. I'm probably going to transplant the okra maybe this weekend. We're supposed to get some rain over the weekend. I have an event that I'm supposed to go to on Saturday, but don't know that I'm going to be able to do that, because I don't really want to be signing books out in the rain. I don't think that's a good idea. Not good for the books anyway. So I may get those out in the garden this weekend, especially if it's going to be raining. It'll be good for them to get started. The tomatoes I've got started in here are still pretty small, so those will be a couple more weeks. But I've got tomatoes that I put in the raised bed that I bought. Just 3 tomato plants, varieties that one variety of Cherokee Purple that I really like, that I like to get every year or grow every year. I just didn't save any seeds last year, but I did save seeds for what I've got growing here in the greenhouse, and that's my hillbilly and my white beefsteak. So I'll be anxious to get those in the ground out in the bed when it's time. But the okra, I've got 2 different kinds of okra, so a regular and then a spineless. So I'm anxious to see what the spineless are like when it comes time to start cooking those up. And so our garden's coming along pretty good. We planted another tree this year, because we have a tree that looks like it's going to need to come down pretty soon. It's a dogwood. It's the last of 4 or 5 dogwoods that we've had here in the yard that were planted long before Mick bought the house and long before I moved in. But since I've been here, I think we've cut down probably 2 of them because they were dying and it was time. And this one is the last one of that surviving. And so we planted a newer variety of redbud tree called a flamethrower. And I'm anxious to see how this does. Right now it's actually about 8 feet tall, so it's not too small. And we planted it close to the dogwood tree so that it could start to grow. And in a year or so, probably next year, we'll end up taking that dogwood down. This will give the redbud room to grow, but it'll also kind of fill in that space, because that's going to leave a big hole in the front yard. We have the dogwood, a crabapple, and 2 different kinds of cherry trees, all that flower, that are out there right now. So we want to keep the front yard full of color in the spring, and we're down to 1 dog, but it was a lot about shade for the dogs. but we like being out in the front yard, out on our front porch. We sit out there a lot in the evenings, and we just like having a little bit of privacy out there, but we can still see out to the street. And of course, in the spring, just seeing all the blooms is great. So we love that too. And so that's what's going on around here. And as I get into more of these podcasts, I'll try and get a pattern down so you kind of know what to expect when you tune in, when you listen, or when you go on YouTube, because I'm trying to make these make sure these show up on YouTube. The last one didn't want to go up there, so I'm going to have to try it again. The program I'm using, I'm still learning, and it says it's attached, but that podcast with Mick, the second episode on YouTube, is not showing up. So I'll get that one up there too, and you'll be able to catch up on those if you're watching instead of listening. And one of the segments I really want to talk to everybody, there's two that I like to talk to everybody about, especially if they're Appalachian, and what's your favorite Appalachian word, and word or phrase. And I don't know if this is really Appalachian, but it's something that I grew up hearing, and something that I've never heard anybody else say. And I think it's something that is really mispronounced. And anytime that my mom or my grandmother would see a moth, but especially my mom, because she was scared to death of them, they would call them cattle bats. Cattle, like in cow. Bats as in like a flying bat. Cattle bat. And if mom yelled, cattle bat, we knew to get out of her way, because she was going to mow one of us down trying to get out of the path of this crazy little moth that was just flying around and flapping around. And if that thing hit her, she just knew for sure she was going to die. So anytime she yelled cattle bat, we knew to get out of the way. And there was one time that she got in the car, and I guess it was dark. It had to be, or getting dark. And Dad was getting in the driver's side, and when he opened the door, the dome light came on, and this cattle bat flew in, and Mom started screaming. We're all in the back seat, and I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. It's seriously one of my earliest memories. And I remember Mom started screaming, and she started pulling at the door handle, trying to get the door open, and she ripped the door handle right off the inside of the door. And then she really freaked out. So Dad had to run around the other side, open the door from the outside, and let her out of the car. And it's probably scared the daylights out of all of us as kids, but looking back on it, we laughed a lot about it. So anytime we get together, something about that's probably going to come up in conversation as we remember old tales of growing up. So that's my favorite Appalachian word of the week. It's cattle bat. And I think the mispronunciation or mishearing maybe on their part was it's an old, maybe an old English word, candle bat. So it would be a moth that flies around a candle, which makes perfect sense. But as kids, we didn't know, because it could have been, if you've got a horse fly, why not a cattle bat? What's the difference? But that's my favorite Appalachian word of the week this week. And if you follow my Substack, I think I've talked about that one before, but you'll see I do an Appalachian word of the week, and I call it my Appacabulary. So I encourage you to go over to Substack and sign up, and you can read portions of those for free. And then once a month I do a fully free edition for everybody so they can read it, and I'll be sharing more things like that over there. And the other segment I want to talk to everybody about is the Screen Porch Supper. So I've mentioned this before, but Mick and I like to have Screen Porch Suppers. It's not anything that we necessarily plan. It's really usually pretty impromptu. We'll just, Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, we're like, why don't we cook out today? It's going to be pretty nice. So let's have a Screen Porch Supper. And we'll figure something out that we're going to fix, and then we'll call or text friends and say, hey, you want to come over? We're having a Screen Porch Supper. And these are all members of our Screen Porch Supper Club. And one of the things that I did to celebrate my book release was I had a Screen Porch Supper and invited a bunch of people over that had helped with the book. And so for each guest, I'm going to ask them, what would you bring to the Screen Porch Supper? And so I've been thinking about that today and trying to figure out what I would have at my Screen Porch Supper. And now that it's getting warm, I think I know what it is I want to have at the next one, and that's my dad's BBQ Chicken. And it's a particular barbecue chicken that I grew up with him fixing all the time. But it's particular to the Shenandoah Valley. And so some people back in Virginia may know it as Shenandoah Valley BBQ Chicken, because everywhere you went in the valley, there was a huge barbecue pit that was owned by a church or a fire hall or a civic club like the Ruritan or Elks or something like that. And they would have this huge pit out back, and that was a fundraiser that a lot of groups used to raise money for whatever it is they were doing. So even at our high school, we had a big barbecue pit, and it was to make barbecue chicken. They could grill anything else they wanted out there, but barbecue chicken was really the purpose. These pits would be 30 feet, 40 feet long, 3 to 4 feet wide, huge racks that would go the whole length of the pit. And these racks had two parts to it. So you'd lay out the chicken halves on there, they'd brush it on with all the mopping sauce, and then just keep flipping these from hot to cold, and cook them for about 2.5 hours. And it's the best barbecue chicken you've ever had. And it was more of like a clear sauce, not a red barbecue sauce. So that's probably what I'm going to fix. So if you've got my book, I encourage you to make some barbecue chicken with my dad's recipe. And if you do, tag me. I want to see it. I want to know what you're doing. And if you follow me, I'll probably be posting that soon because I'm getting a hankering for it. I'm really hungry for it. I want some. I got some a while back when I was back in Virginia, and I talked about it, but it wasn't quite the same. Wasn't what I remembered necessarily, because everybody likes to play with the recipe. But now that it's really getting warm consistently, if I go back up to Virginia, those fundraisers are going to be set up everywhere. Every corner, every parking lot you drive by, you're going to see somebody out there selling that barbecue chicken. So if you find some, let me know, because I really want some, but I'm probably going to make it soon. So that's going to be my next Screen Porch Supper. And I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. So I thank you all so much for listening, for watching, for following along. You'll hear in the closing credits there, please like, share, comment. Let me know what you want to hear, what you want me to talk about. If there's somebody in particular you want me to talk to, because I am not shy about reaching out to anybody. I've got some big names, as I mentioned, on my list, and I'm hoping to get maybe some of those people on here. But anyway, you'll have a great day. I'll see you soon. Well, friends, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to the Appalachian Tale Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Proffitt. This podcast is recorded in Greenhouse Studio right here in my backyard and produced and edited by me with a little help and a lot of encouragement from my husband, Mick. You might know him as Mick on the Porch. If you've enjoyed today's episode, like, rate, and comment, and share it with someone who appreciates a good story, good food, and a little bit of Appalachia. I'll talk at you later. Y'all be safe, and let me know you got home okay.